From Tim Finchem building on Greg Norman's golf tour idea after turning it down, to Norman letting his bitterness slide into his business decisions, here's why the LIV Golf director abandoned the PGA Tour. In fact, it's exactly what started the whole war between the two leagues anyway. And now the first Australian to sign with Greg Norman's LIV Golf has taken a swipe at the PGA Tour, mostly because they weren't even able to bring a regular event down under. And I'm talking about the two-time Australian Open winner, Matt Jones. That's right, he even pointed out that most of the professionals were just bitter about the fact that LIV Golf never reached out to them with an offer. Plus, he couldn't get over the fact that the world's biggest golf circuit hadn't even established a permanent tournament in the country. Not to mention, there was this interview with the Herald and the Age in which he mentioned he was on a massive table right next to Rory McIlroy. Right around the team, he officially announced he was gonna transition to LIV Golf. And that's when Johns mentioned that it wouldn't be too hard for the Rebel Tour to accommodate a couple of extra events in Australia. I mean, Norman's going to bring the richest golf tournament ever played in Australia all the way to the Grange Golf Club. And you're looking at about $37 million in prize money for individuals and teams. As for the PGA Tour, there aren't a lot of expectations. In fact, Jones mentioned that Aussie players even brought it up a couple of times, but there's no sign of it happening, and it simply doesn't make sense. They've been to China, South Korea, and even Japan. They know where the money's at, so why aren't they trying to make this happen? Meanwhile, LIV Golf is already considering bringing a second event to Australia in 2024. It seems like the Saudi-backed Golf League knows how to capitalize on the demand, and that's probably why Jones doesn't regret the transition either. If you haven't been living under a rock, you'll know that his world ranking fell from 149 all the way to 69, and that happened in less than a year, but he's not to blame for that either. It's just that LIV events aren't really recognized officially, so he's technically losing points. At this point, the golfer managed to take a leap of faith, but only time will tell how that works out, and he's not even the only one who made the transition knowing the consequences. It seems like Norman pulled in a bunch of professionals over time. And Gary Player claims he's got some sort of vendetta against the PGA Tour. Now let me tell you, Player won about 9 major championships in his career, and he feels Norman's still bitter. It's all about one thing, and that's the fact that he couldn't launch the World Golf Tour back in 1994. At the time, he unveiled his plans for a tour that was gonna have about 40 of the sport's best players, all competing in 8 big money events. But that plan never really went beyond negotiations because players weren't ready to join. On top of that, PGA Tour Commissioner Tim Finchem said he wasn't gonna let players compete in World Golf Tour events. Fast forward to a couple of years later, and Finchem revealed his World Golf Championship plans, which sounded very familiar, mostly because they were built on Norman's Golf Tour idea. And that's exactly why a lot of players believe that the whole incident left him with a vendetta, which also implies that he's letting his bitterness slide into his business decisions now that he's finally got the LIV Golf. Having said that, while players have nothing against the golfer who made the jump to LIV, he still believes they shouldn't be allowed to come back and play regular tournaments. Not only that, but he also thinks that most of them who left had only one reason fueling their decision, and that's the fact that they couldn't seem to win the regular tour anymore. Now, it sounds more like an opinion rather than a fact, but the player backed up his statement with an example. He claims that even though Louis Oosthuizen was probably the finest gentleman he's ever met in golf, he never really won a tournament in America, so choosing money over it was an easy move for him. Although he was pretty surprised at Dustin Johnson and Cameron Smith's transition. I mean, at this point, things even escalated to a lawsuit. It turns out the PGA Tour could sue the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, or PIF for short, and needless to say, this was a win against its rival, the Saudi-backed professional golf tour that even took in some of its best players. It didn't take long before this ended up in a messy legal dispute between the two. Now, if you didn't know, the two leagues have already been in court since August 8th, 2022, back when 11 pro golfers were suspended from PGA events after playing in LIV tournaments. And these golfers sued the PGA Tour, claiming it was using its power to spark competition and enforce some sort of punishment. Later on, the PGA filed a countersuit on September 28, 2022, claiming that LIV and PIF interfered in their business by offering millions of dollars. The same money that led a bunch of golfers to break their PGA contracts and play for the rival league instead. Not to mention, PIF is not just an investor in LIV, but also the driving force behind it. Fast forward to now, and the case is still going on. But a couple of months ago, back in February 2023, PGA lawmakers requested information on LIV's negotiations with players, all to prove their claim. At the same time, PGA is also under investigation for possible antitrust violations. Having said that, it's not too difficult to assume why the players decided to make the transition. I mean, LIV Golf literally pays out $25 million to each of its 14 regular tournaments. And that's not all. Individual winners also get $4 million, while the winning team of 4 gets about $5 million to split. Plus, since LIV tournaments don't really have any cuts, even the last place player is still guaranteed about $120,000. So tell me, would you want to turn that down? And this wasn't even all of it. There's $30 million set aside for performance bonuses, $50 million for the team championship, and a lot more. Meanwhile, the PGA poured about $54 million into 8 tournament purses in 2023 to compete with its rival, but it's gonna take a lot more for them to match the competition. It's only been 2 years, and LIV has marked its name and pulled in some of the best golfers the world's got. Launched in 2021 under CEO and former golf #1 Greg Norman, LIV Golf hosted its first tournament at the Centurion Club outside of London. And ever since then, it has stepped up with a bunch of shorter courses for bigger prizes. Not to mention the big buyouts it offered players to offset the cost of switching tours. In fact, they paid $100 million each to Dustin Johnson and Bryson DeChambeau to play for LIV. On top of that, there were another $200 million set aside for Phil Mickelson. How does one possibly resist a tempting offer like that? Meanwhile, the PGA keeps suspending players who participate in LIV events. But even if money isn't enough to match the competition, they still oversee 47 events. So they're pretty crucial for a pro golfer's career, to say the least. And these events seem to have squashed a bunch of competitors in the past. And that even includes Norman's World Golf Tour back in the 90s. But everything's different now, especially with the heavy investments coming in from Saudi Arabia, along with some of the best golfers making the switch. So it's hard to say how this is going to turn out. All I can say for now is that Norman's decision to leave the PGA Tour to start his own might have been one of the best decisions he's ever made. Only time will tell if he's able to overpower his rival completely. Until then, here's why the LIV Golf director abandoned the PGA Tour.
Away it goes. To winning Singapore. Oh!
Another wonderful try.